In a blizzard at minus 50 degrees, I was crouched on the outdoor maintenance walkway. While I looked up, the steel beam overhead, thicker than my thigh, had been crushed as easily as a soda can. A massive claw with dozens of metal joints was slowly emerging from the curtain of snow, fixated on me. I wanted to slide down the rope to escape, but at this critical moment, my glove was frozen to the safety line. The leather at the base of my right thumb had fused with the metal buckle of the safety rope into a solid block. I tried tugging it, and the skin there stretched taut, turning pale. Another pull, and the skin would tear off. I remained crouched on the maintenance walkway outside the dome, the wind whipping from the side, snowflakes pelting my goggles with a crackling sound, like someone throwing shattered glass at my face. The aluminum plate beneath my feet was shifting. Aluminum grating should feel firm underfoot. Now it was soft. Every time the wind picked up, the entire walkway would sink slightly, then rebound, sink again, and rebound once more. That rebound carried the shudder of metal fatigue, traveling up through my knees and into the roots of my teeth. I had to clench my jaw to keep them from chattering. I tilted my head up and switched my headlamp to its brightest setting. The beam cut through the snow, landing on the base of the main antenna at the center of the dome. 6 meters away, the antenna's main shaft should have been rotating steadily at 6 revolutions per minute. Now it was moving slowly, jerkily, as if someone were turning a rusted crank. I lowered the beam half a meter. A claw was gripping the shaft. 3 clawed digits clamped onto the support beam of the frost-resistant steel frame. Each digit gleamed as if chrome-plated, with machined rings around the joints like piston rods. It was tightening. The claw tips sank into the surface of the steel beam, the edges of the depression smooth and crack-free, like an aluminum can being crushed, first turning pale, then wrinkling, then collapsing inward. I watched as the claw's grip deformed the steel beam, its cross-section shifting from an I-beam shape to a dumbbell shape. Snow struck the back of the claw, not melting, accumulating in a thin layer. Something larger loomed at the top of the antenna. At first glance, I thought the antenna's counterweight had come loose. A second look revealed that counterweights don't grow joints. It was a silhouette, towering even higher than the dome's red anti-collision light, composed of countless overlapping metal plates. When the wind blew, the edges of the plates clashed together silently, light flowing across their surfaces. It was unfolding. Someone was speaking in my radio earpiece. My partner, Hendrix, he should have been waiting for me inside long ago. The noise in the earpiece drowned out his voice, a fluctuating roar like the breathing of some colossal creature, mingled with the metallic groan of steel plates being crushed in the deep sea. My index finger was still hooked on the safety rope's buckle, the base of my thumb frozen in place. The anti-collision light flashed on, then off. When it was on, the silhouette's shadow engulfed me entirely. When it was off, I could see nothing. 8 hours earlier, I was sitting on a folding chair at the Papa 3 radar station, prying open a frozen coffee can with a screwdriver. The climate control system hummed, warm air blowing down from the overhead vent, pinning the steam from the coffee machine motionless against the tabletop. Hendrix was hunched over the console, legs propped up on his chair, tapping a pen against the fault log on the screen. "It's this again," he said, pointing the pen tip at the screen. "Fault code A07, azimuth motor overload." Since midnight, this code had popped up 7 times. How overloaded can a motor get? It's turning slower than an old lady rolling over in bed. He zoomed in on the monitor. The real-time antenna rotation speed read 0. 8. The normal value should have been a steady 6. Beside it, the current graph spiked like an EKG, peaking every 3 seconds, each spike identical in shape and height, as if measured with a ruler. I poured the coffee grounds into the filter. It's the wind. The wind's knocked the damn antenna off kilter. The motor's trying to pull it back, tugging back and forth so the current spikes. Wind speed, 55 knots. Guess what this thing's designed to withstand? 120 knots. He leaned back in his chair, which creaked in unison with the wind slamming against the double-paned glass outside. I pressed my hand against the glass. It was vibrating, The frequency matched the current spikes on the screen perfectly. My palm trembled along with the glass, a fine, persistent vibration, like resting a hand on a running washing machine. At the time, I thought, Asterisk, this wind is really something else. Asterisk Hendricks was still hunched over the screen, muttering about Arctic sprites causing trouble. He wasn't looking outside. Outside, there was nothing but pure darkness. The red anti-collision light flashed every few seconds, illuminating the 4 antenna supports extending from the dome. Their surfaces were coated in a layer of ice, smooth and reflective under the red glow. I zipped up my cold weather gear all the way to my chin and fastened the dual locks of the safety harness. Hendricks opened the hydraulic door for me, and as it swung open, a rush of white mist poured in from outside, instantly freezing a thin layer of ice over the condensation on the floor. He said, "Come back soon. I'll keep your coffee warm." I pushed the door open and stepped into the passageway. The wind swallowed every sound I could hear. My headlamp cut through the curtain of snow, illuminating the metal handrail ahead. The rail was covered in icicles, each one growing side by side on the metal surface, some long, some short, the longest nearly reaching the length of my wrist. I stopped. The tips of every icicle pointed in the same direction, toward the antenna array, angled upward at 15 degrees. I reached out and snapped one off. The break was transparent, ordinary ice crystals, nothing unusual. I tossed the icicle down the passageway, and it was swept away by the wind, still flying toward the antenna. I kept moving forward, sweeping my flashlight along the ground. The aluminum alloy floor was pitted. I crouched down to look. 3 circular indentations were arranged in a perfect triangle, each edge so smooth it could reflect light, as if stamped out by a press in one go. I shone my flashlight further down the passageway. The same triangular indentations extended one after another, spaced evenly, for feet apart, leading straight toward the antenna base. I stepped into one of the indentations. The surface was black, with a layer of oxide film visibly seeping outward. I stood still. The wind howled continuously in my ears, but its sound was interrupted at regular intervals. Every time a low, metallic stress, noise echoed from the direction of the dome, all the snowflakes around me froze midair, suspended in the beam of my headlamp. They glittered motionlessly, as if encasing me in a transparent sphere. Then, as the sound wave passed, the snowflakes fell simultaneously and the wind resumed. Standing at the center of that spherical vacuum, I counted the intervals between these interruptions. 3 seconds, exactly the same interval as the electrical spikes I'd felt earlier when I pressed my hand against the glass inside. I continued climbing up the passageway. Each step landed in one of the triangular indentations. The aluminum plate beneath my feet sank slightly with each step, then sprang back as I lifted my foot. The metallic vibrations grew increasingly frequent, and by the time I reached the antenna base, the entire passageway trembled faintly, as if I were walking on a sheet of metal being shaken by the wind. The maintenance platform came into view. It was a circular iron frame surrounding the antenna base. 6 months ago, I performed routine maintenance here, and the anti-rust paint on the cast iron casing was still intact. Now, the paint was completely cracked. Along the casing of the main shaft motor, 5 claw marks stretched from the top all the way down to the position of the bottom bolts. I shone my flashlight into the grooves. They were as deep as a finger, their surfaces scraped smooth, reflecting the distorted image of my helmet in the curved metal, stretching my face narrow and my eyes wide. I removed my right glove. It was frozen to the safety harness, so I had to pull my hand out from inside, leaving a layer of skin from my palm stuck to the harness. The cold instantly bit into my exposed fingers, turning them pale. I ran my index finger along one of the claw marks. The moment my fingertip touched the metal, it felt searing hot. I jerked my hand back reflexively. The pad of my index finger was already red. The heat seemed to surge from within the metal, climbing up my wrist beneath my fingernail. I tucked the flashlight under my arm, grabbed a handful of snow, and pressed it against my finger. The snow melted into water, which bubbled and boiled on my skin. A sharp crack echoed from above, the sound of a rivet snapping, like the rhythm of a welding torch cutting through steel. I immediately pressed myself against the outer wall of the antenna base. An object fell from between the trusses of the dome, plummeting through the blizzard before hanging in midair with a thud. The safety harness had caught it. I shone my flashlight toward it. It was Hendrix. The safety harness was fastened just above his chest. He hung 3 meters above the maintenance platform, his body split into 2 halves. The part connecting them was unclear, obscured by the snow whipped up by the wind. I adjusted the focus of my flashlight. His cold weather gear was severed cleanly at the chest, the edges frozen into a layer of white ice tinged with blue. This icy layer spread outward along the fibers of the gear, each strand clearly visible, like the cross-section of a mineral magnified under a lens. His helmet was still on, the goggles reflecting my light. His left arm remained in the position of gripping the safety harness, while his right hand hung limp, the glove missing, his exposed fingers already frozen a bluish gray. I couldn't see his lower half. Below the platform was endless darkness. Suddenly, there was sound in my earpiece. Hendrix must have still been wearing his communicator. His radio signal was still connected to the channel. I heard a continuous, sharp, high-pitched sound, the whirring of an anemometer. His portable recorder was still working. Then the sound stopped. I drew my pistol. My numb fingers curled around the trigger guard, the cold metal pressing against my skin as I pushed the stinging sensation to the back of my mind. The muzzle was aimed upward, the flashlight fixed beneath the barrel, its beam sweeping back and forth between the trusses. The light paused as it hit a crossbeam. He was suspended midair, his cold weather suit abruptly ending just below the chest. No blood, only a layer of pale, frost-whitened ice crystals at the severed section, instantly frozen by the extreme cold. The beam continued its sweep. Above the beam, a metallic, elongated structure extended from the shadows of the truss. It stretched outward segment by segment, each joint spherical like the hydraulic arm of a construction crane, but the number of joints far exceeded the design of any normal machine. 1, 2, 3. I counted 23 joints and still couldn't see its end. Each segment was covered in concentric machining rings, and as my flashlight beam moved, the rings rotated in unison, tightening as the limb aimed its tip toward the maintenance platform where I stood. The outermost joint opened. 3 clawed digits unfurled, each longer than my forearm, lined with inward curving barbs on the inner side. The barbs gleamed, their surfaces also slowly rotating. It halted about 4 meters above my head, the claws rhythmically opening and closing, steady as breathing. I fired. The bullet struck the outermost joint of the claw. Sparks flew. A faint white dent appeared on the metallic surface, its edges peeling back to reveal a brighter, silvery layer beneath. The bullet ricocheted off and hit the truss. The limb didn't retreat. Its joints reacted faster than my rifle's recoil. Before the muzzle flash had even faded, it had already twisted the claw, turning the damaged section away from me. I lowered the muzzle and fired 3 rounds into the gaps between the joints. All 3 hit their mark. The bullets clattered as they penetrated, the sound of metal-on-metal impacts echoing for nearly 2 seconds, as if the rounds were ricocheting inside, bouncing from one segment to the next. With each impact, the corresponding joint shuddered, the tremors growing in intensity as they traveled outward. The limb retracted violently. Every joint tightened simultaneously with a sharp creak, the claws merging into a conical shape as the entire appendage recoiled like a spring back into the truss above. I reloaded. My fingers were nearly numb from the cold. It took 3 tries to release the magazine catch. As I slid the new magazine in, the frostbitten skin near my thumb scraped against the grip, peeling back slightly. I looked up, sweeping the flashlight beam across the truss again. Another limb emerged from below and to my left. It pierced straight through the aluminum grating of the maintenance platform, sending shards flying near my legs. The claw clamped onto a platform support column, crushing the painted surface and bending the steel core into an arc. I crouched and fired at the joint gaps, concentrating my shots on a single segment. By the 7th round, the joint casing finally cracked. A thick, gray liquid, oily in consistency, oozed out. Instead of dripping downward, it defied gravity, crawling upward along the limb's surface toward the base of the joint. I didn't fire the eighth shot. After the joint cracked, the gray fluid slowed its ascent, halting at the edge of the spherical joint and hardening into a shell. The surface was smooth, shimmering with an oily iridescence. Then the limb went still. Starting from a claw, frost visibly spread across the metallic surface. Layer by layer, the white frost accumulated, first filling the gaps between the claws, then covering the ring patterns of the joints. In under 15 seconds, the entire limb had turned into a frost-covered, grayish-white metal rod, indistinguishable from the snow-laden truss beside it. The howling of the blizzard ceased. Where moments ago there had been the relentless shriek of 50-knot winds, now there was only silence, as if someone had unplugged a speaker. My own breathing echoed inside my cold weather mask. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Condensation formed on the inner surface of the mask, bulging outward with each exhale and receding with each inhale. I crouched on the maintenance platform, my back against the antenna base. The muzzle was still pointed upward, but my arm had begun to tremble, the delayed muscle reaction after emptying a magazine, the shaking traveling from my shoulder to my wrist, making the barrel waver. I lowered the rifle, resting the muzzle in a gap in the grating. A crackle came through the radio earpiece. The channel was back online. The base's control system automatically broadcast a pre-recorded message in a monotone female voice. Auroral activity interference has ended. Azimuth motor overload fault check completed. Motor operational parameters normalized. Ice-induced mechanical resistance has been resolved. De-icing system activated. It repeated 3 times. I shifted my gaze from the frozen limb to Hendricks. He was still hanging in midair. The safety rope was intact, the broken section in the middle of his body frozen into an icy white. Where it met the camouflage pattern of his cold weather gear, ice crystals contracted inward, forming concentric rings. With trembling hands, I shone my flashlight onto his goggles. Behind them, his eyes were open, reflective, but the pupils weren't moving. After the wind died down, he stopped swaying, hanging steadily there like a tool bag suspended from the ceiling. I took a deep breath. The air outside the mask was freezing, stinging my chest as it entered my lungs. I reached out and pried the right-hand glove off the safety rope. The leather had frozen stiff. When I slipped it back on, a patch of skin on my thumb web was missing, and the exposed area tightened as the wind hit it. I unfastened the safety rope, preparing to descend to the airlock chamber. The moment I lifted my foot, I caught sight of the reflection in the icy layer on the inner surface of the dome. The interior of the dome was entirely coated in a transparent shell of ice, its surface uneven like a mirror. In that mirror, I saw the reflection of the frozen maintenance arm behind me. Its claw tips were moving, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, perhaps shifting just a millimeter per second, retracting while remaining open. As the claw tips retracted, they brushed against the secondary line of my safety rope. The secondary line was woven from double-stranded nylon, capable of withstanding 2 tons of tension. A single barb on the claw tip lightly scraped past it, and the nylon fibers snapped without a sound. Both strands of nylon broke simultaneously. The break was as clean as if cut by a scalpel. I watched in the icy mirror as the appendage retracted completely into the truss, vanishing into the shadows. The entire process was silent, its movement so slow that I wouldn't have noticed it had I not been staring at the ice. It was pretending to be frozen. From frosting over to becoming still, it was all a tactical pause after exhausting the bullets I'd fired. It could have easily severed my neck while I was reloading, but it didn't. It cut my secondary line instead. It was deliberately keeping me alive. I stared at the reflection in the icy mirror for 3 seconds. Then I moved. I scrambled down the ladder of the maintenance platform, half sliding, half falling. The leather of my gloves had frozen stiff, making it impossible to grip the ladder rungs properly. Halfway down, my fingers slipped off the crossbar, and I fell vertically for 2 meters, my back slamming against the iron plate of the passageway's landing. The tool bag on my back cushioned the impact slightly, leaving a dent in the iron plate from the wrench inside. I rolled over and got up, my headlamp shining down the airlock passage ahead. A shadow moved at the edge of the light beam, but I didn't turn around to confirm what it was. The outer door of the airlock chamber was open, just as I had left it. I rushed in and slammed the lock button with the back of my hand. The hydraulic rods began to push, and the rubber seals around the door frame expanded with a hissing sound as they inflated. The door closed. The sound of the locking pins sliding into the door frame echoed. Click. I leaned back against the inner wall of the airlock chamber, my legs trembling uncontrollably from the thighs down. I looked down at my hands. The exposed skin on my right thumb web had already turned black for frostbite. The indicator light on the hydraulic lock was green. The door remained firmly shut. I pressed the unlock button again. The green light went out, turned red, then green again. The air pump whirred. The locking pins retracted. Click. But the door didn't open. The hydraulic rods pushed, the door panel vibrating within the frame, the frequency of the vibrations increasing, yet the door refused to budge. I punched the door panel, my fist bouncing back without making a sound. The fireproof, explosion-proof airtight door absorbed the impact without even a noise. I peered through the circular observation window into the station. The temperature-controlled lights inside were still on, casting a warm yellow glow over the console. The folding chair at the console hovered half a meter above the floor, slowly rotating. A coffee cup hung in the air, upside down, its contents not spilling. The dark liquid clung to the rim, rotating along with the cup. The operations manual was open to the antenna emergency maintenance page, its pages spread out in the air, their corners pointing toward the ceiling. On the ceiling, Hendrix's metal pencil holder was stuck, the pins inside extending outward, all pointing toward the dome like a row of compass needles aligned to the same magnetic pole. Everything suspended was pressed against the wall closest to the dome. A sound began to fill my ears, a persistent high-frequency tone like a dentist's drill boring outward from the center of my head. I swallowed hard, trying to equalize the pressure in my ears, but my eardrums throbbed with pain. Then a warmth spread in my left ear. A drop of liquid trickled out of the ear canal, flowing down my earlobe. I wiped it with the back of my hand. It was clear. The high-frequency tone had ruptured my eardrum from the inside out. I looked back through the observation window. The inner wall of the airlock passage was glowing, a blue-violet light spreading layer by layer along the welds and rivets, as if high-voltage electricity had been channeled into the panels. The light flickered in sync with the high-frequency tone. I stepped back, my back pressing against the outer door. The outer door was vibrating. I looked down at the steel plate of the outer door. A dent bulged inward from the metal surface. A perfect triangle with 3 circular depressions, spaced 4 feet apart. A meter away, a second set protruded, then a third, lining up along the passage bulkhead toward my position, evenly spaced and perfectly aligned. It was walking outside. With each step, the steel plate of the bulkhead bulged inward in a triangular pattern, the paint around the rivets cracking, fissures spreading along the edges of the bulge. It stopped just outside the outer airlock door, a shadow reflected on the bulkhead. I didn't turn around, but saw it through the ice crystals glinting on the inner door in front of me, much like the reflections off the icy dome above. It crouched outside, 6 limbs tucked beneath its body, metallic wings folded on its back. The edges of each wing opened and closed gently, hundreds of triangular metal plates moving in unison without a sound. Then it raised one limb and tapped the outer door with its claw. Just once. A prolonged, low-frequency groan resonated through the entire airlock chamber, from the door to the walls to the floor, so deep it made my chest feel heavy. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling flickered off simultaneously, and emergency red lights lit up, casting the passage in a crimson glow. The ceiling rubber ring of the outer door began to leak, wisps of white mist squeezing through the gap. The bulkhead steel continued to contract inward, and the needle on the overhead pressure gauge slowly turned clockwise. It was compressing the airlock chamber, inch by inch, steadily shrinking like a can under a hydraulic press. I turned my flashlight toward the ventilation duct cover overhead. The screws of the ventilation cover shot out from the inside, popping onto the airlock floor with a sharp, shell casing-like clatter. Then the cover itself bulged, a bump swelling at its center, the paint cracking. A thick, gray liquid seeped from the cracks, dripping upward against gravity, crawling along the bulkhead to gather on the ceiling before oozing further toward the dome. I crouched in the corner of the airlock, my back pressed into the angle where two walls met. One magazine, left in my pistol, 12 rounds. A flare gun on me, with 3 flares. A multi-tool hung from my belt. A thermite cutting charge was tucked in the outermost pouch of my kit, its aluminum casing frost white. That was it. The tapping outside the outer door stopped. The pressure gauge needle continued its clockwise turn, unwavering. Ice crystals began to fall from the ventilation duct, sprinkling through the gaps in the cover with a sandy hiss, like grains through a sieve. Each crystal bounced once on impact, clinging to others, slowly forming a loose, thickening layer on the floor. I stood up. My legs had stopped shaking. They'd trembled past the point of control, muscles locked stiff. My knees creaked as I bent them. I holstered the pistol and drew the flare gun. Its barrel was twice as thick, the trigger guard large enough for my frozen fingers. I broke the breech, loaded the first flare, and snapped it shut. My hands moved on autopilot. My mind was stuck replaying one scene. 15 seconds. That's all it took from the moment it froze over completely. That was the only physical chance I had. The blue-purple Corona lights on the inner bulk wall suddenly brightened, so intensely that my helmet visor's auto tint instantly darkened, leaving my vision swimming in deep green. Then the light vanished. The high-frequency hum ceased. The pressure gauge needle halted. The ventilation duct stopped shedding ice. The airlock fell into an absolute silence, so profound I could hear the faint grind of cartilage as I turned my neck. I raised the flare gun, aiming at the ventilation duct opening, and pulled the trigger. The flare shot out at 32 meters per second, ricocheted once inside the duct, and ignited. 80,000 candelas of magnesium light exploded in the enclosed space, blazing blue-white through the cover gaps. A high-pitched metallic screech echoed from the duct, lasting a full 2 seconds. Then the thing retreated from the ventilation system. I could hear its joints scraping backward along the inner walls, each movement causing the duct to bulge, tearing the outer insulation foam from the rivets and exposing the silver aluminum foil beneath. The flare continued to burn inside the duct. 20 seconds of burn time. I used those 20 seconds to do one thing, climb. Grabbing the overhead pipe brackets, I pushed off the bulkhead, hauling myself upward. The iron pipes were coated in ice, slippery. I had to dig my nails into the frost to secure my grip. At vent level, I wedged the multi-tool's tip into the cover gap and pried. The cover bent, buckling at the center to reveal a triangular opening. I squeezed through sideways. The shoulder of my cold weather gear scraped the edge, the sound of tearing fabric echoing in the duct. Inside the ventilation duct, the flare's intense light was still burning, illuminating the inner walls of the pipe. The duct was less than a meter in diameter, forcing me to crawl on my hands and knees. The inner walls were covered in traces of that gray fluid, arranged in parallel lines, all running in the same direction, from deep within the duct toward the airlock. The marks were spaced evenly in an equilateral triangle pattern. I crawled in the opposite direction. I reached the end of the duct, where it connected to the external ventilation louvers under the dome. Beyond the louvers was the inner surface of the dome. The flare's light shone from behind me, casting the shadow of the dome's steel frame onto the blizzard outside. The shadow flickered in sync with the flare's pulsating glow. I kicked open the louvers and climbed out, my boots stepping onto the curved steel plates of the dome's interior. The surface was covered in a layer of ice, and with every step, I felt the ice crack under my soles. The fragments slid down the curve of the dome, slipping over the edge and falling into the darkness below. It took a long moment before I heard them hit the platform far beneath. Directly below the dome was the main antenna array. I stood on the maintenance walkway lining the dome's interior, a narrow path only half a meter wide. with no guardrails. To my left was the domed shell, to my right, a nearly 20-meter vertical drop. Above, the domed skylight glass was caked with blizzard snow, its thickness filtering the collision avoidance beacon's red light into a diffuse crimson glow. The flare in the duct went out. Instant darkness pressed down, but my eyes quickly adjusted and the dim red snow light once again outlined the structural lines inside the dome. The moment the flare died, I saw it. It was crouched on a crossbeam directly above the main antenna array, all 6 limbs tucked beneath its body. Its pair of metallic wings were fully spread, each feather opening and closing independently in a sequence that traveled from the wing root to the tip, like a row of louvers flipping in the wind. The wing surfaces were covered in dense hexagonal mirrors, identical to the compound eyes on its head. Its head featured 6 ball-jointed sensors, each slowly rotating in different directions, scanning. One of them, the largest compound eye at the center, was fixed on a maintenance walkway where I stood. The flare went out. My night vision hadn't fully returned, but I knew it hadn't moved. It remained crouched in the crimson snow light, wings still shifting, joints still rotating, compound eyes still locked on me. It didn't budge. It was waiting for my next move. My hand found the thermite cutting rod on the outside of my tool pouch. The aluminum tube was freezing to the touch. I pulled it out, gripped the handle, and pulled the safety pin. The rod's tip began emitting a white flame burning at 3,000 degrees Celsius. The flame didn't waver in the wind. A straight beam of white light that instantly vaporized the nearby ice into steam. Under the intense white heat, the creature's form was fully exposed. 10-meter metallic wings, unervingly articulated joints. Gray mucus dripped from the seams. Burning black oxidation pits into the steel frame upon contact. I turned off the cutting rod. I shifted my gaze from the creature to the antenna base. The motor housing was crushed and deformed by its claws, but the transmission unit's cables were still intact, protruding from the broken casing. 3 main cables, red, black, and white, each thicker than my thumb. If the backup power were directly connected to the transmission unit, the antenna would overload and spin wildly. 15 seconds to frost over. Antenna operation. Those 2 clues combined into my only chance to fight back. I began moving along the maintenance walkway toward the antenna base. I climbed onto the antenna base. The steel plating underfoot was crumpled where the claws had gripped it, and every step scraped up metal burrs. The cast iron part of the motor housing had split open, revealing the coils inside, which were streaked with residue of that gray fluid. The fluid had semi-solidified, forming a surface film, but the liquid beneath was still slowly shifting. Kneeling at the edge of the base, I gripped a broken piece of railing with my left hand for balance and sheathed the thermite cutting rod back into my tool pouch with my right. The 3 main cables hung from the crack in the motor housing, red, black, white. Their insulation had been scraped away by the claws, exposing copper cores that glinted under my headlamp. The backup power access port was nearby, behind a steel panel. The panel had been struck by something, 3 of its 4 bolts loosened, with only one still hanging on, its shaft bent at a 15-degree angle. I used pliers to grip the bolt head and twist it upward. The bolt creaked but didn't budge. I twisted again, and the pliers' teeth slipped, shearing off one corner of the hex head. I removed my left glove and gripped the bolt barehanded. My skin stuck to the freezing steel, feeling like dry ice. I didn't let go. With my right hand, I clamped the pliers onto the bolt's base and pulled with both arms. The bolt snapped. The panel sprang open, hitting my knee, and revealed the access port inside. The port had 3 rows of terminals, made of brass, each marked with positive and negative poles. I twisted the copper core of the red cable around the positive terminal and the white one around the negative. My fingers were numb from the cold, and it took 3 attempts to secure them properly, the copper strands digging into my nail beds, sending a sharp, tingling sensation from my fingertips up to my wrists. The black cable was the ground wire, which I jammed directly into a crack in the cast iron casing of the motor, the copper core pressed against the raw metal, a makeshift ground. As my fingers brushed the outer edges of the red and white terminals, The moment they made contact, an arc flashed. A blue-white spark leaped from the positive terminal to the webbing between my thumb and forefinger, then bounced back to the negative. I didn't have time to let go. The arc seared a trench across the frostbitten skin of my hand, stretching from the base of my thumb to my wrist. The surface of the groove turned white in an instant, then yellow, then char black. The scorched flesh curled inward, wisps of smoke rising from the edges, carrying the bitter scent of roasted meat. The high-voltage arc had carved a blackened furrow in a split second, the seared flesh contracting tightly, the excruciating pain nearly forcing me to release my grip. My hand jerked away on its own, my entire right arm numb from fingers to shoulder, the numbness soon replaced by a dull ache, as if someone were hammering in my bones. But the cables were connected. The backup power's activation switch was beneath the panel, a red lever. I nudged it upward with my knee. The antenna moved. The main shaft motor emitted a deafening metallic clang. The frequency, all wrong. It was spinning too fast. The tachometer needle shot from 0 to its limit, slamming against the stop pin at the end of the dial, shattering the glass face. The entire dome began to tremble, the maintenance platform swaying violently underfoot, each oscillation more intense than the last. The unbalanced load from the rotating antenna array warped the steel framework of the dome. The overhead beams groaning under structural stress, welds bursting, rivets popping out one by one, ricocheting off the inner walls in showers of sparks. Then I heard it sound. The thing rose from above the antenna. Its wingspan, fully extended, was wider than the antenna's diameter, each metallic feather beating at such high speed that individual movements blurred into a shimmering outline. The tips of its wings emitted a strobing noise as they vibrated, piercing the air with a frequency so high it merged with the shriek of the unbalanced main shaft, creating a dual-layered, high-pitched noise that drilled into my eardrums from both sides. It hovered directly beneath the dome's apex, less than 3 meters from the skylight. 6 appendages extended from its underbelly simultaneously, each ending in splayed claws, while the hundreds of hexagonal mirrors in its compound eyes swiveled downward in unison. The red glow of the collision lights reflected in those mirrors, fractured into hundreds of identical shapes, as if someone had tiled the ceiling with a crimson honeycomb. It dove. Its left and right appendages adjusted its trajectory in alternating motions, the edges of its wings leaving trails of atomized ice crystals in their wake. Its target was the antenna array's backup tower number 2. The moment its wingtip grazed the steel structure, the tower snapped. No sound. The entire steel column slid apart at the midpoint, the break so clean it gleamed. The severed section crashed against the inner wall of the dome, bounced once, then toppled over the railing of the maintenance walkway, plummeting downward and shattering the aluminum grating panels along the way, fragments of metal and steel raining toward the dome's base. It pulled up. Before the dive could fully conclude, its joints twisted, the beating of its wings intensifying abruptly, its entire body rotating 90 degrees midair, transitioning from a dive into a side slip, its wingtips scraping along the dome's inner wall. Where it passed, the ice shell exploded, shards flying, revealing the polished steel beneath. Another appendage lashed out, its claw tracing an arc through the air, aiming straight for the antenna's main shaft. I drew my pistol. All 12 rounds fired toward the largest compound eye at the center of its sensor array. The first bullet ricocheted off the hexagonal mirror, deflecting into a dome beam with a spark. The second struck the edge of the same mirror, a crack spreading along the hexagon's lines, radiating from the center to its 6 corners. The third shot penetrated. The bullet burrowed into the fissure, shattering the structure behind the mirror, the small hexagonal fragment peeling away to expose the black, honeycombed scaffolding beneath. Its body convulsed violently. The tremor was so intense that all 6 appendages spasmed in unison, as if electrocuted. Every claw splayed open, clenched shut, then splayed again, movements losing rhythm. On its left wing, each metallic feather stood upright in sequence from the base, clattering against its neighbors like a burst of firecrackers. From the damaged compound eye, a gray liquid spurted, solidifying midair into slender, ash-white filaments that drifted through the dome space. I kept firing. The fourth, fifth, sixth shots all landed in the same spot. The hexagonal lenses of its compound eyes shattered one after another, and with each fracture, its body swelled locally, as if an internal component had lost pressure equilibrium. The swelling occurred on its back, where the metal shell bulged outward before bursting, releasing a gush of gray liquid that instantly froze midair and shattered into powder upon hitting the ground. My pistol jammed. The magazine was empty. I tossed it aside and reached for the rifle on my back, but during the crawl through the ventilation shaft, the rifle had snagged on my waist, its strap caught on a broken vent slat. I yanked hard, and the strap snapped, leaving the rifle just out of reach. Its sensors damaged, its flight became erratic. No longer diving vertically, it careened wildly inside the dome. Its wings struck a crossbeam, bending it. Its limbs swept past a maintenance ladder, tearing it from its mounts and sending it spinning. After two chaotic loops, it regained its bearings. Its remaining compound eyes locked onto me. It saw me. I was on the antenna base, less than 10 meters away. It charged. All six limbs extended forward, claws merging into a spear-like formation, wings tucked back to minimize drag, transforming into a metallic lance. Its tip the six fused claws. The wind pressure hit first, an invisible force wall that shattered my cold weather mask and sent my goggles flying. My eyes were exposed to the minus 50-degree air, tears freezing instantly, vision blurring. By touch alone, I pulled out the thermite cutting torch again, yanked the safety pin, ignited the flame, and thrust forward. The burning end of the torch slammed into the spherical joint between two limbs on its abdomen. 3,000-degree white flames licked the ringed surface of the joint. The rings expanded, the metal glowing from dark red to orange to yellow-white under the intense heat. The joint's outer shell softened, the gray liquid inside vaporizing, steam hissing out like a pressure valve. Every joint in its body seized at once. Limbs stiffened, wings froze midair, their edges trembling erratically. Its right forelimb instinctively lashed downward. The claws hooked the edge of the aluminum grating beneath me, wrenching the entire 3-meter square platform, and me, off its supports. The I-beam beneath groaned, welds tearing at the roots, sparks flying as it bent. I was flung into the air with the platform. The moment of weightlessness lasted about a second. I looked down. The grating was still flipping upward, my soles half a meter above it. I was floating above the platform. The safety rope and carabiner behind me suddenly snapped taut, then slackened instantly. Another claw had swiped past, a barb catching the rope and slicing through both nylon strands with a clean cut. The severed rope whipped away from my chest. Then it released the platform. Both the platform and I began to fall. I twisted the thermite torch to maximum. The flame turned from white to blue, the temperature soaring to 3,500 degrees, aiming for the weakened joint in its abdomen. The spot I'd already dented, I drove the torch in like a pry bar and wrenched it sideways. The joint's metal shell split open. Gray liquid jetted out with tremendous force, splattering my face and instantly freezing in the cold air. A hard crust formed over the right side of my face, cracking and flaking as I turned my head. It convulsed in pain, the spasm flinging all 5 remaining limbs outward, one striking the antenna's emitter array. The emitter's casing shattered. After half a second of stillness, it went berserk. The entire antenna became a blur of violent rotation, deadly microwave radiation flooding the dome like an invisible net. The moment the beam swept across its wings, the metal feathers began to change color, from silver gray to dark red, then orange, like steel under a welding torch. The edges softened first, the triangular tips drooping, contours rounding. Then the entire wing liquefied, the rigid metal becoming a flowing semi-solid, like molten solder. A droplet of liquid metal fell from a wingtip, striking the icy dome floor, burning through ice and steel alike, leaving a hissing red crater. It spiraled completely out of control. No longer attempting to fly, it began clawing wildly, snapping the dome's beams and bending the antenna supports, but it was futile. No steel could bear the horrific, melting weight of its form. Its wingspan gradually shortened as its feathers liquefied inward from the tips, the molten droplets cascading downward while its entire body slowly sank. The moment it fell, I clung desperately to the edge of the buckling grate. Gravity bent the aluminum bars, slicing through the frozen dead skin of my palm to expose the grayish tissue beneath. Then, with a deafening crash, the platform slammed into the snowdrift. The impact flung me off the platform. I tumbled through the snow, my insulated suit striking something hard. Ice, perhaps, before I came to a stop. I was alive. The platform had landed 3 meters to my left, buried in the snow, sending a 3-meter-high spray of powder that rained back down over me. Above, molten metal still dripped like a downpour of liquid steel. Each droplet seared a steaming crater into the snow where it landed. I lay there, snow piling around my neck, melting for body heat before refreezing into ice that scraped against my chin. My left arm rested at an unnatural angle across my chest, completely broken. I didn't dare look too closely at the twisted joint. I stared at it for a few seconds, then looked away. The metallic rain continued overhead. Molten droplets trickled down the dome's framework, sliding along beams, trusses, and the ruptured joint I had shattered. Still suspended midair, wedged between 2 crossbeams, its fractured surface oozing gray fluid. The droplets streaked through the flashing red glow of the collision lights, flickering on and off as they fell. Each hissing impact against the snow sent up plumes of steam, the wind scattering them to reveal charred black pits beneath. With my functioning right hand, I groped for the backup radio at my waist. The plug was frozen in its slot, impossible to pry free with my nails. I used my teeth instead, clamping down on the plug's base, my incisors wedged into the plastic grooves. A sharp jerk of my head, combining jaw strength with neck muscle, yanked the plug loose. The cord dangled from my mouth as I caught it with my right hand, fumbling for the base station's external port buried beneath the snow. My fingers dug through the icy layer, snow grains grinding into the frostbitten cracks of my palm like shards of glass. The port's cover was frozen shut. 3 hammering blows from my fist broke it open, and I jammed the plug in. A green light flickered on. The headset crackled with the automated response signal from the base command center. A recorded female voice reciting Papa, 3 radar stations designation, and the current time. I listened, pulling my hand from the snow. 3 seconds later, the voice cut out. The frequency remained open, but no one spoke. Only the distant pulse of the next radar station, dozens of kilometers away, echoed through a low-frequency rhythm, steady in time. I counted. It matched my heartbeat. I switched the radio to full-spectrum monitoring. 5 stations. Papa, 2, Papa, 4, Papa, 5, Papa, 6, Papa, 7, all transmitting the same error codes. Antenna rotation slowing. Current anomalies. Motor overload. Each station's signal carried that same low-frequency pulse, synchronized with a heartbeat. I turned the radio off. The channel selector clicked into place. Silence. I tore the headset off and threw into the snow. The snow kept falling. Flakes landed on my eyeballs. The first melted, the second stuck, the third covered the second. My vision blurred into white, then whiter. Before it faded completely, I took one last look at the sky. The aurora was unfurling. A green curtain of light stretched from one horizon to the other, shadows gliding across its surface. Vast in number, their shapes all resembling outstretched wings, one after another drifting past the luminous veil. Their flight was slow, almost weightless, all moving in the same direction, toward the next radar station.